What is happening in Israel right now could change the course of world history. It is not an exaggeration, it is a warning. A war that goes beyond missiles and tanks. A war that involves religion, oil, artificial intelligence, and the future of billions of people. And the most frightening thing? Almost no one is prepared for what is coming. The new war in the Middle East. The epicenter is Israel. The conflict between Israel and armed groups in Gaza, such as Hamas, is not just a regional dispute. It is a spark that ignites global tensions. Since October 2023, the escalation of war has led world powers to take positions. The war has gained a proportion that transcends borders and has become a matter of global stability. This feeds the narrative of international impunity and increases anger in the Arab world. The involvement of the US, Iran, Russia, and China in strategic positions over the conflict transforms Israel's situation into a geopolitical chess game. If Iran enters the fray directly, the involvement of American and NATO forces becomes inevitable, and the world could be facing a new proxy war. The polarization of narratives between Israel's self-defense and Palestinian humanitarian suffering reaches the heart of social networks, the media, and diplomatic decisions. And the issue of Palestine is once again being debated with intensity. Historical wounds are reopened and inflamed. The legitimacy granted by powerful allies encourages it to press ahead with offensives, even at the risk of future sanctions and condemnations. The economic, social, and political consequences will be felt on every continent. And the future of global stability could be decided there, now. The question that looms is, how far will this go? The decisions made there could reconfigure alliances and start new disputes for global influence. The Temple Mount has once again become the focus of religious and political disputes. With airstrikes, ground invasions, and total blockades in the Gaza Strip, Israel has been acting with a military force that the international community considers disproportionate. The holy city has become a minefield, where every gesture could cause an international explosion. Jihadist organizations cite the liberation of Jerusalem as the main motivation for their movements. The city has become a battle flag. Christians are also feeling the impact. With the highest number of startups per capita in the world, the country is at the forefront of innovations in cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, weapons, and agricultural technology. Some products, such as the Pegasus spyware, have already been used by governments to spy on journalists, activists, and political opponents. The number of pilgrims has fallen dramatically. Churches report attacks and intolerance, and the Arab Christian community faces abandonment and fear, but also fears its misuse by authoritarian regimes. The country's influence on digital warfare is undeniable. These technologies are changing the logic of modern warfare. The Holy Land is becoming a no-man's land. Religious tourism, which used to generate billions of dollars a year, is collapsing. Businesses are closing, guides are out of work, and hotels are emptying. The instability of the Holy City is impoverishing thousands. Israeli government hackers operate silently across the globe. For many analysts, the future of Jerusalem will be the barometer of global peace. If there is consensus on it, there is hope. But if it continues as it is, it will be the epicenter of the next great world conflict. Global religious leaders are calling for restraint. The Pope, Israel's chief rabbi, and Muslim leaders have all spoken out calling for peace. But their voices seem weak against the force of cannon fire and secular anger. Jerusalem is burning metaphorically and literally. And the world, once again, ignores the signs that a storm that will affect everyone could begin there. At the same time, the country claims self-defense in the face of terror and missiles launched against Israeli civilians. For Jews, Christians, and Muslims, it represents the spiritual heart of their faith. But today, that heart beats with tension, division, and fear. However, the Israeli government is emphatic. Jerusalem is eternal and indivisible. This impasse hinders negotiations and fuels hatred. The world is watching images of destruction, hospitals collapsing, and civilians buried under rubble. Hezbollah, supported by Iran, is threatening to open a new front in northern Israel. A war on two fronts could transform the current conflict into a devastating regional war. The UN is increasingly weakened. Resolutions are not being enforced, and US vetoes in the Security Council prevent direct action against Israel. Meanwhile, Arab countries such as Jordan, Egypt, and Lebanon are watching with apprehension. The international community's greatest fear is that the conflict will spill over into the borders of Israel and Gaza. The response from global public opinion is intense. Protests are taking place in major capitals. Universities are the scene of ideological clashes. In this scenario, Israel feels isolated, but also strengthened. The world is not prepared for a prolonged war in Israel. Jerusalem, holy city, city in flames. Jerusalem has always been more than a city. It is a symbol. In recent months, Jerusalem has become the scene of intense clashes between Israeli forces and Palestinian civilians. Any movement there, such as the entry of Jewish parliamentarians into the site sacred to Muslims, generates immediate reactions throughout the Islamic world. The push to divide Jerusalem into two capitals, Israel and Palestine, has returned to the agenda of global diplomacy. Extremist groups use the city's symbolism to justify attacks and radicalization. Israel's technological rise and its global risks. Israel is known as the startup nation. With companies such as Checkpoint, Mobileye, and NSO Group, Israel exports cutting-edge technology to dozens of countries. The line between innovation and surveillance is increasingly blurred. The world benefits from Israeli technology. In the military field, Israel has developed systems such as the Iron Dome and the Arrow system, capable of intercepting missiles with almost surgical precision. Cybersecurity has become a new weapon. Israel, along with the US and China, is one of the world's leaders in cyber warfare. Defending strategic interests. In the health sector, Israel leads research into biotechnology and personalized medicine. Israeli companies have pioneered vaccines, artificial intelligence treatments, and robot-assisted surgeries. But all this technological advancement comes at a cost: global dependence. Many countries are becoming hostages to Israeli-controlled technologies, especially in the fields of digital and military security. This support goes far beyond words. It involves billions of dollars a year in military aid, shared intelligence, and political influence on the international stage. The export of weapons and surveillance systems also fuels conflicts. There are reports that Israeli technologies are sold to repressive regimes, contributing to human rights violations. The dilemma is, how can the international community benefit from Israeli innovation without compromising its ethical and political implications? There is still no clear answer. Israel is shaping the world's technological future, but not everyone is prepared to deal with the consequences of this invisible power. The role of the United States: unconditional support or calculated risk. Being pro-Israel guarantees support from powerful groups, but it can cost votes among young people. There are real strategic risks. If Iran attacks Israel and the US is forced to intervene directly, the country could be drawn into yet another long, expensive, and unpopular war in the Middle East. Progressives and Muslim communities. Israel relies so much on U.S. support that it feels empowered to act more aggressively. And the decisions made now could define the U.S. place in the new global balance of power. This diplomatic self-confidence is what allows for risky actions, such as preemptive strikes and settlement expansion. The United States has historically been Israel's greatest ally. The American presence as a diplomatic shield allows Israel to act with relative freedom even when its actions generate strong international condemnation. Both countries do not have diplomatic relations and exchange constant threats, either directly or via allied groups, such as Hezbollah and militias in Iraq and Syria. If the war expands and the political costs increase, Iran is investing in ballistic missiles, kamikaze drones, and most feared, a nuclear program that is increasingly close to becoming militarized. The US will have to decide to maintain unconditional support or to redefine the limits of the partnership. This includes blocking UN resolutions and constant military support. But this alliance comes at a price. The image of the United States in the Arab and Muslim world deteriorates with each conflict. Protests at embassies, attacks on American military bases in the Middle East, and boycotts are growing in intensity. Domestically, the United States also faces a dilemma. More and more young Americans, especially in universities, are questioning the unconditional support for Israel, calling it collusion with apartheid and war crimes. The US president is walking a tightrope. It needs to balance support for Israel with public pressure and the need to keep diplomatic channels open with the Arab world. The US elections also play a role in this game. Candidates use the Israel issue as a political weapon. In addition for its part, but how far will this support go? What is happening in Israel is testing the foundations of American foreign policy like never before. The Iranian threat. The looming enemy Iran is today Israel's biggest strategic rival in the Middle East. While Israel is arming itself with cutting-edge technology, the prospect of a nuclear-armed Iran is a red line for Israel. Israeli leaders have already stated that they will not allow this under any circumstances. The threat of preemptive action is real. Although most were intercepted, the act showed that Iran is willing to risk direct war. In April 2024, there was the largest Iranian attack on Israel in decades, with more than 300 drones and missiles. The risk of miscalculation is extremely high. One wrong missile, one more aggressive retaliation, and the conflict could explode irreversibly. And Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria. The countries encircling Israel and applying pressure on several fronts simultaneously. And the world knows, a direct confrontation between Israel and Iran would have devastating effects. Iran also dominates the chessboard of proxy war. By supporting groups such as Hezbollah, Houthis, the nuclear deal, which Trump abandoned and Biden tried to restore, is practically dead. Without an agreement, Iran is accelerating its program with less oversight. Cyber warfare is another silent battlefield. Iranian hackers are attacking Israeli systems, and vice versa, affecting critical infrastructure and public services. The invisible war has already begun. And when that happens, it will involve powers from outside the region. Western diplomacy is trying to prevent escalation. For many analysts, the question is no longer if, but when, there will be a direct war between Israel and Iran. Oil, global security, military alliances, the balance of power, everything will be affected. There are no safe humanitarian corridors, and aid convoys are constantly blocked or bombed. Israel and Iran are at the center of a possible international earthquake. Independent analysts and NGOs report indiscriminate attacks on civilian areas. The world is not prepared for the impact of this collision. The humanitarian collapse in Gaza, tragedy or war tactic. There are allegations of silent ethnic cleansing being perpetrated under the guise of war. Both sides are competing over the narrative, but the suffering of the population is real. And popular support among Palestinians, and even in Arab countries, is growing, despite the human cost. The situation in Gaza was already serious before the war. Since the blockade imposed by Israel and Egypt in 2007, the population has been living in one of the most densely populated and poorest areas in the world. The cycle of radicalization feeds on this pain. Protests, boycotts, social media actions, and diplomatic ruptures with Israel have already been observed in several countries. The war is isolating Tel Aviv in certain circles. There is a lack of drinking water, food, electricity, and medicine. Tragedy has become routine, and this is perhaps the cruelest aspect, the trivialization of the pain of an entire people. Hospitals operate without anesthesia. Children die buried under the ground and civilians live in ruins. With the new Israeli offensive, the humanitarian tragedy has reached extreme levels. International organizations such as the UN and Doctors Without Borders speak of a total collapse. Israel claims that Hamas uses civilians as human shields and that its targets are military personnel. The propaganda surrounding the war is intense. Videos, audios, and reports circulate rapidly, and the truth becomes difficult to discern. Many are asking, is the siege of Gaza merely tactical or part of a larger attempt to empty the region? The destruction in Gaza is generating waves of global outrage. The psychological impact is also immense. An entire generation of Palestinians is growing up in ruins, surrounded by hatred, death, and hopelessness. Meanwhile, Hamas is growing stronger politically. The destruction is used as a symbol of resistance. The world looks at Gaza with horror, but without effective action. The advancement of biblical prophecies? Coincidence or signs of the end? For millions of people around the world, especially evangelical Christians and Orthodox Jews, current events in Israel are more than geopolitics. They are the fulfillment of millennia-old prophecies. Biblical texts such as Ezekiel, Daniel, and Revelation speak of a great war around Jerusalem, the gathering of the Jews to their land, the construction of a third temple, and a final battle, Armageddon. Many see the return of the Jewish people to Israel, the control of Jerusalem, and the increase in religious tensions as living parts of this prophetic narrative. For them, the spiritual clocks are speeding up. Pastors, rabbis, and religious leaders point to current events: war, national turmoil, hatred between peoples, natural disasters as birth pangs that precede the arrival of the Messiah, whether Jesus or the Jewish Mashiach. This would require radical changes to the Temple Mount, where today the most sacred Islamic mosques are located. The possibility of rebuilding the Third Temple, a dream of part of the Jewish community, further inflames tension. For Islam, this move would be a desecration. For dispensational Christians, it would be the trigger for the emergence of the Antichrist. The theological collision between religions is closer than many realize. But even those who do not believe feel the symbolic weight of the events, because Israel has always been a point of intersection between heaven and earth. On social media, thousands of people share verses, prophetic maps, and interpretations that connect wars, eclipses, and biblical dates. The apocalypse has become a trend that religious fanatics, on any side, will act to fulfill the prophecies with their own hands. Messianic extremism, whether Jewish, Islamic, or Christian, could set the region ablaze in the name of a vision of the end. The current scenario is already affecting oil, the dollar, gold, and the global economic climate. The mere threat of closing the Strait of Hormuz, through which 30% of the world's oil passes, makes the markets panic. This would put the world at risk of recession. Critics claim that these interpretations are exaggerated, manipulated, or politically motivated. This temporarily strengthens the US, but destabilizes weaker economies that depend on commodities. Any disruption to its startup ecosystem affects innovation chains in digital security, artificial intelligence, and biotechnology. Emerging countries, such as Brazil and India, are already feeling the effects on their domestic inflation. The greatest danger? And all this because of a small country that, once again, is at the center of the global chessboard. They are already facing an energy crisis because of Russia, and now they see the risk of a new logistical collapse coming from the south. At Western universities, especially in the US and Europe, the Israel-Palestine issue has exploded into a culture war. Students are camping out, disrupting classes, and pressuring institutions to take a stand. Freedom of expression is being tested to the limit. Whether these are real signs or just historical coincidences, what is happening in Israel has rekindled eschatological sentiment in the world. The line between political criticism and religious prejudice is blurring. And in this climate, Even skeptics are beginning to look at Jerusalem in a different light. And air risk in the region has increased, affecting tourism and international trade. The impact on the global economy, oil, war, and uncertainty conflicts in the Middle East have always impacted the global market. And when Israel is involved, the effects are amplified. After the start of the war, the price of a barrel of oil soared. Iran, an ally of anti-Israel groups, has already hinted that it could interrupt the flow of oil in the Persian Gulf if the US and Israel intensify their military actions. The increase in oil prices directly impacts the price of fuel, food, and transportation. Investors are rushing to safe assets, gold, the dollar, and US bonds. In addition, Israel is a technology hub with global influence. The aviation sector is also suffering. Several flights to Tel Aviv have been canceled. Middle Eastern routes have been redesigned. For European countries, the war is an additional headache. Economists warn that a long war in Israel could cause a systemic shock to world markets, similar to what happened in 2008, only now with military, not financial, roots. The financial world is tense, nervous, and unstable. The uprising on campuses and in the streets, the new war of ideas. The conflict in Israel is not only being fought with weapons, but also with words, protests, and ideologies. Pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel protests have taken over campuses such as Harvard, Yale, Columbia, and Oxford. The cancellation of speakers, the suspension of students, and even arrests for hate speech show how the academic environment has become a battlefield. Professors are divided. Some advocate boycotts of Israel. Others accuse these movements of disguised anti-Semitism. On social media, the debate is even more heated as Palestine and Israel polarize millions of users. Digital influencers are forced to take sides or pay the price of silence. The conflict has become a reputational crisis for global companies. Major brands and celebrities are also entering the arena. Some are losing contracts for supporting Israel. Others are boycotted for showing sympathy for the Palestinians. This has led to the emergence of a radicalized alternative media that amplifies theories, violent videos, and fake news. Traditional media tries to remain neutral, but is accused of bias by both sides. The war has become a metaphor. Most worrying, the growing wave of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia in several countries. Attacks on synagogues and mosques, verbal and physical aggressions, and vandalism have become more frequent since the beginning of the war. For many, the debate is no longer about Israel and Palestine, but has become a symbol of contemporary struggles, colonialism, racism, resistance, oppression. And the scars of this conflict will last for generations. And all this shows that the world is not only divided geographically, it is divided intellectually, spiritually, and ideologically. The Palestinians, on the other hand, see the UN as an accomplice to the occupation and the prolonged blockade. The silence of the UN, impotence or connivance. But these resolutions are not binding. They are diplomatic theater. However, given what is happening in Israel and Palestine, many question whether the UN still has any relevance. The United Nations was created to maintain peace and prevent conflict. Even so, global responses remain timid. Almost all have been blocked, mainly by the vetoes of the United States. The diplomatic paralysis is visible. Since the beginning of the war, dozens of resolutions have been presented to the Security Council. If powers and states realize that they can act without consequences, international law will cease to exist in practice. Now, in the Middle East, it seems to have been replaced by informal coalitions and unilateral actions. The organization created to unite the world is being ignored. But words without concrete action ring hollow, especially for civilians who see their homes destroyed. The UN Secretary General has issued statements calling for a ceasefire and respect for international law. In Gaza, UN agencies report a humanitarian catastrophe. UNRWA schools have been bombed, convoys have been blocked, and aid workers have been killed. Israel accuses the UN of bias, claiming that the organization ignores Hamas attacks and focuses only on its military responses. Images, headlines, and videos have become weapons as lethal as missiles. And in this vacuum of authority, chaos finds fertile ground to expand. Some of these images are real. Others are old or fabricated. The challenge of separating fact from fiction is enormous. Now, anyone with a cell phone can transmit a view of the conflict and work strategically to build international support. This has given voice to many, but it has also opened space for manipulation. Gaza is one of the most dangerous places in the world for the press. This drastically limits access to the truth. The editorial line changes radically depending on the country and the target audience. The General Assembly, where all countries have a voice, manages to approve resolutions with an overwhelming majority calling for a truce. The global audience lives inside information bubbles. Many experts see the UN today as an institution hostage to the interests of the great powers, incapable of mediating conflicts where its own members have strategic or military interests. In crises such as the war in Ukraine, the UN was overshadowed by NATO. The biggest risk? That the UN's lack of effective action will encourage other conflicts. Israel exposes the weakness of the global system. What was supposed to be a mediator has become a spectator. The role of the media and the war of narratives. The conflict between Israel and Palestine is not just taking place on the battlefield, but also in the media. The news coverage is deeply divided. Some outlets emphasize Israel's right to defend itself. Others focus on the suffering of the Palestinian people. Networks such as Al Jazeera, BBC, CNN, and Fox News offer such different versions of the same event that they seem to be narrating different wars. With the advent of social media, traditional media has lost its monopoly on the narrative. Videos of dead children, ruined buildings, and desperate screams go viral in seconds. Hamas and the Israeli government understand the power of storytelling. They both produce content, distribute communications. Journalists are persecuted, censored, and even killed in conflict zones. The public, confused, is divided between empathy and skepticism. Many end up withdrawing, avoiding the subject. Others become radicalized, taking sides based on fragments of information. Amidst this, movements such as independent fact-checking emerge, but even these face distrust. Truth has become a question of point of view. Those who control what the world sees also control what the world feels and decides. The war in Israel shows that controlling the narrative can be as decisive as winning battles. The internal division in Israel, unity or irreversible fracture. On the outside, Israel appears to be a united country in times of war. But on the inside, social and political fissures are deepening. The social fabric is being stretched dangerously. National unity is now more an illusion than a reality. Thousands took to the streets to protest against the judicial reform proposed by Benjamin Netanyahu's government, which they accused of undermining democracy. The war temporarily halted the protests, but it did not quell the tensions. Many see the escalation as a direct result of disastrous policies and alliances with ultra-nationalist and religious sectors. It is the turning point that is accelerating the disintegration of the world order built after World War II and the Cold War. The Israeli army, generally seen as a pillar of stability, is also facing dilemmas. This order is now being challenged from all sides. Reservists have refused to serve, and generals have publicly warned of the dangers of politicizing the armed forces. A new Cold War is in the making. China, for its part, is building a geopolitical alternative with the BRICS, the Belt and Road, and its rapprochement with Muslim countries and Iran. The Israeli war becomes a symbol of the collapse of American hegemony. The Arab-Israeli population is experiencing an internal conflict between national identity and solidarity with the Palestinians. Tensions in mixed cities have already resulted in intercommunal violence. It is a breaking point. The world we knew is dying, and the new one has yet to show its face. And this transition will be painful. Its unconditional support for Israel is contested even by its own European allies and by part of world public opinion. Families are divided between mourning the victims of Hamas attacks and criticizing the government for allowing the most serious security breach in the country as history. The multipolarity that so many predicted is finally materializing, and with it, instability. Young Israelis are more skeptical. Many feel trapped in an endless cycle of military service, war, and fear. The emigration of young skilled people is growing discreetly. Each bloc interprets the facts in its own way, arms its allies, and prepares for a world where localized conflicts generate global shocks. National cohesion is being tested like never before. Even before the war, the country was facing one of the greatest political crises in its history. The religious sector is pushing for tougher action, while liberals and secularists are calling for negotiations and an end to the occupation. Instead of uniting the country, war could deepen the rift between those who believe in military force and those who want peace through diplomacy. If Israel, one of the most complex and militarized democracies in the world, collapses from within, the impact will be profound, not only for Israelis, but for the entire stability of the Middle East. The New World Order is at stake. The war in Israel is not just another regional conflict. Since 1945, the United States has led a global system based on military alliances, multilateral institutions, and an interdependent economy. Russia has already challenged this structure with its invasion of Ukraine. The involvement of Iran, Hezbollah, and possibly groups supported by China and Russia in the conflict in Israel could consolidate the anti-Western bloc. The U.S., weakened by internal divisions, no longer has absolute control of the global narrative. The emerging powers see this moment as an opportunity to challenge the Western model of liberal democracy, humanitarian intervention, and just war. The UN, as we have seen, is paralyzed. The G7 seems irrelevant. The BRICS are expanding. The war in Israel reveals that there is no longer a global consensus. The old rules of the game have been broken. Now brute force, digital propaganda, and flexible alliances are the instruments of the new international politics. What is happening in Israel is more than a war. The role of religion in modern conflict. Although many analysts try to reduce the Israeli-Palestinian conflict to a dispute over territory or power, the religious dimension is inescapable, and perhaps the most flammable of all. Jerusalem is a holy city for Jews, Christians, and Muslims. Each group claims, protects, and venerates its holy places, many of which overlap geographically. 1 centimeter there is worth more than 1,000 hectares anywhere else in the world. Even if there were division of land, shared control, or diplomatic agreements, the faith of millions would prevent them from accepting certain concessions. The esplanade of the mosques, or Temple Mount, is the symbolic epicenter of this tension. The Dome of the Rock in the Al-Aqsa Mosque for Muslims, the site of the ancient temple for Jews. One space, two memories. The religious conflict makes a purely political solution impossible. They influence military decisions, control ministries, and push for actions that further distance any possibility of peace. And because it touches people's hearts directly, it is harder to negotiate than oil or borders. Children in Gaza and Israel will grow up knowing only the sound of drones and sirens, not songs of reconciliation. Until spiritual leaders are heard as peacemakers, not as ignitors, the conflict in Israel will continue to be a battle between gods, not just armies. What if this war doesn't end? The question no one wants to ask, but one that more Iran will seek to accelerate its nuclear program. Other countries in the region could follow suit, creating a new geopolitical nightmare. And more experts are considering is, what if this war simply doesn't end? And no one, absolutely no one, is prepared for it. What if it becomes an endless war, like others we've seen in history? Afghanistan has seen more than 40 years of continuous conflict. This is not just another video, it is a warning. The world is changing before our eyes, and ignoring it could cost us dearly. Share it with someone who needs to wake up to this reality. And to continue understanding these important topics, be sure to check out the video suggestions that are appearing on your screen right now. You won't want to miss it. Syria has been at war for more than a decade. Congo has been in the grip of more than 25 years of violence. The world has seen endless wars before. What sets Israel apart is the global impact each move makes. A missile in Tel Aviv affects oil in London, politics in Washington, and protests in Paris. If war turns into a chronic conflict, with periodic outbreaks of intense violence, the Middle East will live in a state of constant tension, and the entire world will have to adapt to it. Orthodox Judaism sees the possession of Israel as the fulfillment of divine promises, and Christianity, in turn, sees the region as the stage for the end of times. Islam sees the liberation of Palestine as a sacred duty. Extremist groups of all religions use theological arguments to justify acts of violence. They act not for votes or power, but for faith, and this makes them unpredictable. In Israel, the power of religious parties has grown significantly. On the Palestinian side, Hamas mixes politics and religion in its charter, claiming that Palestine is Islamic land and that not a single inch of it can be given to non-Muslims. Religion, which could be a bridge for reconciliation, has become a battlefield. Peace could become an empty word, as in so many other regions. The next generations will become even more radical, resentful, and traumatized. Diplomacy will be discredited. Hope will be exiled. The risk of weapons proliferation will increase. And the West, torn between economic interests, political alliances, and internal pressures, will no longer be able to maintain the illusion of neutrality or control. If this war does not end, the world will enter a new era, an era of predictable chaos, in which the abnormal becomes routine and daily tragedy loses its power to move. And perhaps this is the biggest warning of all. What is happening in Israel could become the new normal. If all this shocked you, imagine how many people around you are still completely unaware of what is happening.